You're listening to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast with Kari, Coody, pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. Here we talk all things straightforward and honest when it comes to holistic health and simplifying your best steps forward while eliminating all the gimmicks and confusion. Leave the overwhelm at the door and get ready for impactful action steps that get to the real root of your issue and actually move the needle in your health. Let's dive into the show. Hello, welcome back into this series that we are about to wrap up, all about underlying infections. This is the next to last episode. And if you haven't caught the other ones that we've done, there have been 3 so far. You'll definitely want to make sure that you go back and watch those and just get kind of caught up on this whole series that I'm doing about underlying infections. And so today's topic is Lyme. And Lyme disease is definitely something that we just heard a lot about. You might have personally dealt with it or are dealing with it or know somebody that has. So this topic is a beast. I'll be honest. It is known as the great mimicker, and it is something that's extremely hard to really put your finger on at times, especially if it's in the chronic stage. And so I'm just going to kind of give you some general information about Lyme and also just some of the symptoms that often aren't talked about. And then just some advice on, if you are struggling with this, what I feel like is how I help clients and the best way to go about it. So first off, Lyme disease. It is caused by a bacteria. It's bacterial. It's caused by the Borrelia bacteria. It has different strand names in different countries, but that's typically the one that you're going to see in the US. And it is, again, it's a bacteria that is often accompanied with other co-infections, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But where does it come from? The most common place that we hear about that it comes from is ticks, but that's not the only way that we can get this Lyme bacteria. And so it is a vector-borne illness. So vector-borne as in things that suck your blood. So you could put mosquitoes in that category, other things. Really the top 3 that it typically comes from are ticks, mosquitoes, and fleas. However, it can be passed through the placenta. They have found Lyme bacteria in semen, and so it could be passed that way. So there's other ways that you can get it rather than just being bit by a tick, which I don't think sometimes we really realize. And so I wanted to share that. But now I'm just going to kind of go into some symptoms because I do feel like there's really one main symptom that we hear about, and that's the bullseye rash. But that is not always the case for everybody, and that's really an acute symptom. And honestly, the majority of cases don't even have a bullseye rash. So if if that's the only thing you're looking for, I don't want to lead you astray and give you false information, because that's definitely not the only sign or symptom that, you've been bitten by a tick or that you have Lyme. So other acute symptoms would be flu-like symptoms, the achiness, the fever, things like that. You pretty much get that with acute onset of Lyme and all the co-infections. So that's something that, you can just kind of think back about, having those flu-like symptoms and just to try to kind of piece some of this together. That might be helpful for you. And a lot of people do give antibiotics in that acute stage. And I think that they definitely can be helpful in helping you feel better quicker, but that I would not necessarily stop there in thinking that if you did get the bullseye rash and you did get the antibiotics, that is just taking care of it, that you don't have to deal with this anymore. Because honestly, that's rarely the case, unfortunately. As I'm going to explain, this bacteria is a stealth pathogen, and that means that it's very, very, very good at hiding. It's very good at changing forms. It's just super good at being stealth in the body. And so that's why a lot of times it's just really hard to get rid of it, right? You have these symptoms that are oftentimes misdiagnosed, and, it's just hard to sometimes put it all together. And so if this information seems not super straightforward, it's because Lyme is not straightforward. And, that's why you have to work with somebody on this. I just really can't stress that enough. And you have to do things in a stepwise approach and really make sure your body is detoxing well. So we'll talk about all those things. But I wanted to mention some of the more chronic issues that pop up with Lyme, because again, that's great if you can really pinpoint that this is your issue in the acute phase. But a lot of times, if you don't have a bullseye rash and maybe you have these flu-like symptoms, you just think it's the flu or some other type of illness. And so really we start to see some of the more chronic issues, as the days, months, and years go on. So there's 4 kind of different types of symptoms that typically show up with chronic Lyme: neurological, cardiovascular, joint pain or joint issues, and then reproductive issues. So first, neurological, these are things like just cognitive dysfunction, brain fog could definitely be one of those, anxiety, depression. If you have like sudden aggression or a sudden onset of these things, that would be a really good just clue that you might need to look into this. Memory issues, even suicidal thoughts, especially if obviously there's, a lot more to some of these issues, some of these symptoms that I'm saying rather than just Lyme, but this could be a part of that, especially if some of these things came on all of a sudden. Brain fog, as I mentioned, mood swings, and neuropathy is a really, really big one with Lyme. Cardiovascular would be heart palpitations, chest tightness, jaw pain. Jaw is a big one, having, jaw issues, because the Lyme likes to settle in those areas of our body. And then trouble breathing could also be lumped into that. Joint pain, as I mentioned, a lot of children that were diagnosed with arthritis, they actually found Lyme in. So arthritis is a big one that Lyme can be associated with, because it does get into your joints and tissues and kind of settles there. It likes to settle in pockets of your body. So I mentioned brain is one, joints and tissues in general, and then jaw. I would say those are some really, some spots that they really like to kind of settle in and get all nice and cozy. Reproductive issues are really affected because the bacteria oftentimes settles in the bladder, and your bladder and reproductive system, it obviously is very closely related. And so a lot of times you'll see reproductive issues because of the way that it attacks your bladder tissue. And so those are just for the Borrelia bacteria, Lyme. So I mentioned the co-infections, and you don't necessarily have to have Lyme to have co-infections, but a lot of times these just tend to go together. They just like to coincide together. So Babesia is a common co-infection. That's a blood parasite. And so it would make sense why a really big symptom of Babesia is unexplained anemia. So if you have anemia and it's just kind of like, it just is ongoing and you don't really, there's no other reason why, you're maybe doing all the other things, that you can to help that. And it's just unexplained, that could link back to this. Air hunger, or you really can't catch your breath that great. It's just hard to do that. Babesia definitely can cause that. And then intense night sweats, like really, like you just wake up drenched. That definitely can be associated with Babesia as well. So those are kind of the main 3. Obviously there's more, but just trying to keep it concise here and just give you some general things to think about. And then the last co-infection that I'll mention is Bartonella. And it's kind of associated with cat scratch fever, because that bacteria can live around like the fingernails of cat and then the teeth of cats. And so this one really affects your brain and your joints. So brain, as in panic, is a big one, like schizophrenia, sudden rage. Like, again, these things are like sudden. They just all of a sudden come on. And then joints. The Bartonella bacteria, which is the Lyme co-infection, of course, it loves your lower extremities. And so a lot of times your calves might be affected by this if they're just super duper sore. And then plantar fasciitis is a big one with the Bartonella bacteria, because it just creates a lot of inflammation, and that can really affect the lower part, your lower extremities. So those are just some symptoms. Obviously, there could be a lot of other symptoms, but these are just some of the main ones that could be linked. So if you have a lot of the symptoms that I mentioned with, maybe it's just all over the Lyme and the co-infections, or maybe just Lyme. It just gives you something else to think about as a real root cause of these issues. So, as I mentioned, Lyme is really good at spreading throughout the body. It gets in your blood and it just goes to different parts of your body. It also is really great at getting behind biofilms to hide in the body. I mentioned biofilm in the first episode, and just basically that it's just this sac that can house different pathogens in your body. And Lyme is one of those. It's just one of the ways that it is really good at hiding. And so that's one thing that you just want to consider whenever you are busting some of these biofilms. Like I mentioned in that episode, Lyme is one of the things that could get released. And so you want to make sure that you have a plan in place, that you're detoxing well. And I think a binder is really key with this as well, and just to make sure you bind up what is being released and get it out of your body. So just consider that whenever you think about busting up biofilms. But one thing that the Lyme does is it really affects your ATP and your mitochondrial activity. I talked about this in a previous episode, because a lot of these pathogens do that. They will attack the cell and its powerhouse so that your body can't heal as well, and that it doesn't produce as much energy as we need. And so if you can't detox, then you can't get this out. So these things are just super duper smart. So your drainage organs are very, very key when you think about any of these underlying infections, but definitely Lyme. That's just a really key thing you want to consider, and just making sure that you go about this in the right kind of stepwise approach. And so I wanted to kind of end with talking about making sure that you do go about this in the right way. And again, everybody is so different. There's just so much individuality with everything, and especially something like this. So I'm just going to kind of give you some things to consider and think about when you are just trying to figure out where to start if you or someone has Lyme. So when you think about Lyme being a stealth pathogen, I think it's really important to not go after the Lyme itself right away, because it is very good at hiding and just morphing and all of those things. And so sometimes you just have to really make sure your body is equipped to handle that before you really go after the Lyme. And so opening up drainage pathways is going to be extremely, extremely key. Just making sure that you're pooping and that you're sweating and that your lymph system is in check, and liver, gallbladder, things like that. I'm actually going to put my drainage support guide that's free that you can look through, just to give you some additional ideas about how you can make sure that your drainage is open. So I'll put that in the show notes in the description of this video. That's really key. Ensuring that your adrenals and your mineral balance is up to par. And because you think about having the energy that's needed to get rid of some of these things, that's going to be super key. And so the adrenals, and then making sure that you're really feeding those properly, that's going to be super key. But a lot of times, and what I usually do in my practice is I'm going to make sure the foundations are in place so that you're detoxing well. And then we're going to do some parasite/bug removal before we go after the actual Lyme. So the process I typically follow is the foundations, which would help the drainage pathways get going. And then I'm going to do a little bit of work on biofilm, and then parasites, and then mold, metals, if those are needed. And then we might go into Lyme and co-infections. And so you can't just go straight after the Lyme, because if you do, you could what's called herx. That just means that you stirred up all these things and they can't get out, and it just causes you to feel awful, basically. And so we don't want that. You don't want to stir up a lot of things and not be able to get them out, and it just be too much at one time. And so that's something that's super key in all of this. But, if sometimes you have a lot of these symptoms and you just can't seem to get over that hump to actually start the healing process. And so sometimes you really need to focus on the symptoms that you're having. Like I know sleep is a big one for people with Lyme. And so just helping your body to be able to rest at night, or maybe a lot of times these pathogens and things are active at night. So that could be why you're not sleeping as well, if you're just having a really hard time with that. So taking something to really help get those down would be key. And then another one with sleep can be glutathione. And sometimes you can take straight glutathione, or I really like a product called Shasandra. It's from Supreme Nutrition, and it can help you produce your own glutathione, which to me, I like better than just giving the end product. So that's something that, you might just want to consider. And then one more thing that I'll mention is just doing a food sensitivity test. If you have a lot of pretty complex symptoms and you also have autoimmune, I think food sensitivity should really be considered, because if these foods are causing so much inflammation and there's already a lot of inflammation going on, oftentimes it's just too much for your body and you're not going to be able to heal from some of these things. So I'm not a huge fan of just cutting out foods and thinking that's going to fix the issue, which a lot of times that's what food sensitivity tests are done for. This would really be done to be super targeted, as far as we're going to remove this food because it shows that you're really sensitive to it for sake of inflammation while we're doing this healing protocol. So that's just kind of something to consider with using a food sensitivity test to cut down on some of the inflammation. But I think that is a good overview of Lyme. Again, there's so many other things I could say here, but this podcast is called Integrative Health Simplified. So hopefully that was a simple yet informative overview of Lyme. But the thing that I want you just to remember is this is a stealth pathogen, and that means that it can mimic a lot of other things and it can hide. A lot of times if you try to go after it, even with antibiotics or different herbs, it will change forms. It will go dormant. It will maybe, if you take something, you might feel better. And then when you stop taking it, you feel worse again. That's usually because of this characteristic of this bacteria. So this is why it's really important to work with someone. If you know you have Lyme, if you have a lot of these symptoms, myself or others, they're trained in this to go after and really support the body so that it's able to do this detox work effectively and hopefully help your body to just rid itself of this bacteria. And so I'm going to put the ways that we could work together, so you could check out that more. I'll put it in the description of this video and in the caption, or in the show notes, excuse me, if you're listening to the podcast. But thank you so much for joining me for this episode. We'll have one more left. It will be on viral infections, and interested to see what you guys think about this series. So let me know. You can always message me on Instagram. If this has been really helpful for you, I'd love it if you'd just share this episode with somebody that you feel like would benefit from it, or just share your takeaways with me. I would love to know that. All right, guys, I will see you on the next one. If this episode has served you in any way, I would love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways over on Instagram and tag me at Kari Coody. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can continue to learn and grow together.